What's going on, man? Welcome to the show. Andy, Andrew, what do you prefer?
Andy, please. Yeah. Only Andrew when I'm in trouble. And if you're my mum, that job is currently not up there. So
Yeah.
I'm afraid it's
Hey,
Andy.
cool.
Jordan, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, man. I followed you for a long time. It's a really it's a pleasure to have you on. Obviously, I've read the Muscle and Strength Pyramid and some of the work that you've done on there. I'll do an intro. Obviously, people have already listened to that by the time they're getting to this, but give people a little bit of a backstory of who you are, how you got into the space, and what you're doing now.
Thank you. So actually, the training book comes out next month. We're just proofreading the Japanese version of that. Sorry, context. I live in Japan.
Yeah.
I've been here for coming up to 17 years. I'm originally, you might hear that I don't sound very Japanese. I'm from Birmingham in the UK. And
You a Birmingham FC fan?
no, Manchester United,
Oh
I'm
no,
afraid.
I'm an
Although,
Arsenal
if
fan.
it would be any, it'd be Arsenal. No,
Oh,
I'm
no.
sorry. Podcast is over, mate. Wrong team.
I
No.
should have waited till the end. Yeah, yeah.
Oh God. It's the wrong red team. So yeah, I am a nutrition and training coach. I've been doing that for the last coming up 12 years. I have two businesses, an English facing business that does coaching and a Japanese facing business that does coaching. I came over originally to Japan because I was interested in karate, thought I'd do that for a year while teaching English and go home. And then 6 or 7 years in, I ended up staying because I loved it. And then 6 or 7 years in, I started blogging because I was very upset with the state of the industry here and how I saw my friends who did not have a lot of money. We were in a very working class area, a very working class gym. They're all very serious bodybuilders and powerlifters. And I just felt they were getting ripped off. They were spending money on supplements that they absolutely didn't need. And I felt that the industry took advantage of the fact that there is science is published in English. There is an information gap because of the language barrier. And so there's very little incentive for people financial incentive, that is, to say, hey, yo, you don't need all of that. Focus on calories, consuming an adequate amount of protein, etc. first. So yeah, I just started blogging and wrote in English and Japanese, and then kind of split those two off into separate websites, and I've built the businesses from there.
When you got there, what was the fitness space like in Japan? Or where are you located in Japan, and how has it changed since you've been there?
People are bigger now. The waif like look was so if you look at boy bands and girl bands, I think that gives you, and how they have changed, I think that gives you a fair idea of what the physiques of the desired physiques are over time. And it's very clear that, 16, 17 years ago, the physiques that were desirable has shifted massively. Now, it's not uncommon for people to have, I wouldn't say they're particularly very muscular, but clearly both the guy and boy and girl bands, they've been training. Whereas it used to be, let's say, 90s Kate Moss style kind of catwalk, very slim, wafy. That used to be the style. So I think part of that acceleration has been due to the acceleration of foreign culture in Japan due to like Instagram, etc. And so there's more access to foreign celebrities and what's currently in fashion. And so girls now, they want to have an ass. Guys now, they want to have a six pack, and they realize that dieting their way there isn't going to get them a physique that's desirable. They need to actually have enough muscle mass to be worth dieting down to that six pack for. So that's good. And now there are far more people doing compound lifts, doing more serious training. So it's definitely improved.
And so I talk sometimes about like we're in like the glute era right now. And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
we could talk about how like that like sometimes it gets overblown and it's this thing that everyone thinks is so important. But what I will say is like the pursuit, like the like putting having a big glutes up on a pedestal, it being something that people want now, has really put a barbell in front of, and I say barbell not to idolize a barbell, but to have a lot of women start to begin to lift heavy everywhere for everything, and then just reducing the stigma of having muscle and being strong. And like, yeah, like sure, it starts with like, okay, I'm just going to do some hip thrusts, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm full blown strength and resistance training. And I also think CrossFit has done, I don't know how much that is over in Japan, but I just think that in general that we're in the glute era where like I want to grow my glutes has blossomed into women exploring just getting stronger and building muscle overall. And also CrossFit, while, some people are like, oh, they're too, these CrossFit chicks are too muscular. I definitely think that it has, normalized, if not better than that word. That might be just too not positive enough of a word, but normalized like having muscle and had, young girls growing up, looking up to these people who are like really strong. And I think that that's an amazing thing for sure.
Sorry. Yeah. So it's definitely, getting over a bit of what I swear was coronavirus, but 2 PCR tests say wasn't. So I'm sure I had it though, but I've still got this lingering cough. Anyway, so yeah, I think it's a great thing, because now people aren't scared that they will touch at women. I'm thinking of here, that they'll touch a weight and suddenly get big and bulky. And part of that is because now there are more and more people, more and more women posting that they are training on social media. More and more women in the spotlight, I should say, as well as average women, of course, too. And they don't have these bodybuilder women type physiques, and they have physiques that are desirable. And so that's encouraging more young women to get into training. And I think that's a great thing. Yeah. Yep. And also just the fact that a slightly bigger body size is now fashionable / accepted, has also made people feel more comfortable to get into a gym from, say, perhaps the average starting position before. So let's say that you are say bigger than what would have been acceptable, say in the 90s or 2000s or whatever, right? Then it might have been very hard at that point to get into the gym, because you might feel, oh, I can't be in the gym yet, which is obviously backwards thinking. But I think it's made it just a more comfortable, welcoming place. It's easier to get into strength training, and more people are wanting to do it. And I think that's a great thing. Yeah. I shouldn't really be speaking about what women how women feel about this. Is just kind of what I've observed. I should say actually that I work exclusively with men, and men that have a lot of training experience. They've got a lot of experience with dieting, and they're super frustrated and want to kind of get fairly granular and take things to the next level because they've plateaued. So I'm really not speaking from coaching experience there, just kind of what I've observed.
Cool. I appreciate the caveat there. Let's touch on that for a bit, because I don't coach exclusively women, but I would say that some vast majority of my clientele are women. And actually an interesting, nice, that's my own bias of it, and what I enjoy is that there is a large emphasis on at least some amount of building muscle and strength. And this is not a race to the skinniest mentality with the vast majority of people that I coach, which is super nice. Let's take that clientele for a bit. Like, you have a male clientele who's like slightly on the more advanced side, slightly on the more experienced side. What are they actually struggling with? What do they end up actually wanting to come to you and get from you?
Yeah, mostly they will. Let's break it into 2 patterns. You've got those that are newer to training, and they are struggling with this state of purgatory, I call it, where they don't feel big enough to diet. They don't feel lean enough to bulk. And so diet being a fat loss phase, bulk being a muscle gain phase, but where you will gain a little bit of muscle. And they haven't had success with keeping their calories or having eating behaviors where their weight stays stable and they're gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, which most people will achieve when they start out. But the problem is that at some point, it stops becoming measurable, which means you can't stay motivated for it, and you certainly can't manage that and adjust for it. So they need to make a choice between cutting or bulking, and that trips a lot of people up. And I think there are many women who kind of feel perhaps trapped as well by this, especially if they start using the scale as the main metric for whether they are achieving progress. Very common with women. And what I'd say is take a tape measure and start measuring your stomach. Measure at the navel. Measure, say, 3 fingers below the navel, 3 fingers above the navel, and then your hips at the widest point, so straight over the bulk of your ass. Measure that and do that once a week and have a look how that's changing, because you might see that your weight gradually ticks up over time or stays the same. Obviously, it depends on where you're at, right? If someone wouldn't look at you and identify as you needing to lose weight, let's say, right? You might see that if you just start training and eating according to your hunger and fullness cues, that your weight actually starts to go up because you're training and your body now wants to feed that muscle that is trying to grow to support the training that you're doing. But you actually get leaner. So that's like absolutely crucial, but very hard here in the head. And that's something that men struggle with too. It's not, excuse me, it's not very visible, right? People don't notice because people don't talk about these struggles. And then, let's say pattern 2, there's a guy he's been training for a while now, and he's adjusted his diet. He's come to a point where, he's bulked, perhaps been successful to an extent, and cut down and has gained a little muscle, but is just not happy with the current level of progress that they've made. They want help pushing forward. Perhaps they know technically what they need to do. Every time they try to do it themselves, they get a bit wrapped up in their head. They start overthinking things and they just want to hire out that decision-making process. That's a very common thing. Like most of my clients, all of my clients, dare I say, they could do it themselves, but like they're busy working professionals, often like family men, kids, like, they got a lot that they're juggling. It just makes sense to hire out. So, yeah.
I think sometimes coaches are just, and it not to downgrade what we do or devalue it, but I firmly believe sometimes that we are just the vehicle, and that, some people are at a state of readiness to change and they want to make a change, and we are going to be just the people that they come to help facilitate that. Some things that they already know. I had a call with a new client today, wonderful lady, and I just got the feeling that I was like, she needs some validation, some affirmation. She needs knowledge that what she's doing is efficient, that she's being efficient with her time, and that she doesn't have to come up with this all herself, and that this is like professional approved. And sometimes just that validation, that affirmation, that knowledge that the path that you're on is leading in the direction that you'd like to go. Sometimes you think you're doing the right things and you're not really sure. And maybe if you did like do it for a long time, you'd find out that you were on the right path, but you kind of motivation might waver because you're not really sure. And just being able to provide that structure and knowledge that you're on the right path is, I'm not saying all I do, but quite often if you have a client who's like, they mostly kind of have an idea of what to do, it's you putting a couple pieces together, but also putting a stamp of approval of like, yes, keep doing this. You're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. That peace of mind is huge, and knowing that they're going about it in the most efficient manner. Because if you think like your best years are now, right? It's easiest to do all of this now because it only gets, incrementally harder as we age. What is the cost of getting it wrong consistently over time? All that time that you're spending, going not just in the gym, but going to the gym, coming back from the gym, the food prep that you do, the shopping that you do, the expense of that, the laundry that you do for that, right? I think it just makes sense for some people.
Yeah.
Not obviously not all, but I totally get it. Yeah, I mean, it's what we do, right? It's what we do.
Excellent. Let's jump into, we're gonna do a little bit more of like a rapid fire Q&A. I put up a Q&A box. I got some questions and then I ended up not doing the Q&A. And so we're going to do it here. And some of it's going to be, funny enough, there were some actually similar things that I pulled from your content that I was just going to throw at you, but some questions were very similar. And so we'll just jump right into it. The first question is, and if we get carried away on any of them, I'm really fine with that. It's not like we need to get through all of them. So we dive in deep. We dive in deep. First question is it dangerous to go under 1,200 calories?
No.
That's a good start. I mean, where is this myth, I would say, or this like misconception that this is some magic number? I mean, is there any like rationale, history behind this? Is this when people are like, oh, this is what a toddler is supposed to eat? I mean, where is, like, you work with people, at what stage are you saying, okay, we shouldn't go under X, or are you even building a framework that way? Or how are you communicating something being too low?
Yeah, so it's a convenient number that I think well-meaning people have just kind of got stuck upon, but there's not really any truth behind that, it being dangerous. What I say, the bottom line that people should be going with their calories is. There are a few things, and let's think of them in terms of layers of importance. So first, they need to be including vegetables, a sufficient amount of vegetables, ideally fruits, including the quote unquote good foods in their diet, so that they are likely covering any micronutrient deficiencies that they may have with very low calorie intakes. You could also take a multivitamin as well as an insurance policy, but not a replacement there. And then you want to be consuming enough protein, 1 gram per pound of your target. There are many ways to explain this, but 1 gram per pound of your target body weight is a good way of thinking about it, split up evenly throughout the day. So you need enough calories for that. Then you need enough carbohydrates to fuel your training, and that's going to vary from person to person and level of advancement. Generally speaking, the more advanced you are and the more training you're doing, the more carbohydrate you'll need. The reason that that's important is because you need that training in order to stimulate, in order to tell your body that it needs to hang on to the muscle while you're in a calorie deficit. And then for fat intake, you do need to have some fat intake in your diet. But it's going to be very hard to have any kind of diet where your fat intake practically becomes so low that it is risking hormonal upset, so to speak. And so we don't really need to worry about kind of any bottom line numbers there. It kind of takes care of itself. Yes. Yes. And so then the next layer on top of that is your rate of weight loss should be appropriate. So the leaner you get, the slower you should typically take it, because the leaner you get, the higher the risk of muscle loss, and we want to avoid that at all costs. And so as you're closing in on, for men, I say as you're closing in on abs, it might not be quite that case for women, but as you're, becoming more defined in the abdominal section, let's say, you want to have a slower rate of weight loss. So we like to say between 0.5% and 1% of your body weight per week, with the lower end of that as you are, getting very lean. So let's say you weigh 140 pounds, then you might want to be losing no more than 0.7 pounds per week. And so that number there pretty much dictates your calorie intake level. Now, that as in the bottom line maximum that you would want to go to. Now, smaller people with very low activity levels who have been dieting for a while, and so they have some level of metabolic adaptation now, they may find that in order to hit that 0.5% of their body weight per week, they need to go lower than 1,200 calories to get there. Okay, remember those three caveats there. Smaller people, petite people, right? Very low activity levels outside of their gym training. So they're sedentary, they've got a desk job and they drive to work and they drive to the gym and they don't walk around very much. And perhaps they don't have any other physical hobbies. Fair enough. And what's my third point there, Jordan?
That they are have some metabolic adaptation. They've been dieting for a bit of time.
Exactly. Now. They've been dieting for a while. Perhaps they've lost like 15, 20, 30 pounds, right? So they may need to go lower than that. And so here's the thing. If you find that you are at the point with your calorie intake level and you cannot sustain it, just increase it a little and accept a slower rate of weight loss. But what you definitely don't want to be doing is, say, typing into a forum or whatever social media platform you use, hey, I'm consuming X number of calories, but I'm not losing weight. Is this right? Because then, of course, you're going to get people shout at you, telling you that, oh, no, that's way too low, blah, blah, blah. But that's just not the case. It is about calories in, calories out.
Yep.
Now, of course, then we run into issues of people talking about starvation mode. That's kind of a myth, although metabolic adaptations do happen. So put aside anything about if you eat too few calories, then your body stops you from losing fat. That's nonsense. And then the other thing is that is achingly, desperately common is that people underestimate the calories that they're consuming chronically. And so you might think you're consuming 1,100 calories, but actually you're consuming more like 1,400 calories, or perhaps even more. And then another thing that you could look into, instead of just reducing your calorie intake or keeping your calorie intake the same and accepting a slower rate of weight loss, especially for those smaller people, for those sedentary, is increasing their activity levels so that they're burning a few more calories each day. And you could do that by maintaining a minimum step count. Your phone is likely logging it. And so somewhere between 5 to 10,000 steps a day, depending on where your current baseline is. I'd say just aim for a little more is a good idea as long as you can sustain that. So all of these things kind of factor in. That is the nuanced answer here. But of course, it's not a nice simple soundbite like avoid 1,200. You can't go below 1,200 calories because XYZ, right?
Clip for Instagram. I have not a slightly different take. Actually, I agree with everything you said 100%. The slightly different context I might put the answer in is like, there's actually, outside of people who are getting so lean that the leanness itself might start to trend towards less health, like unhealth. You're getting to an underweight, you're competing, right? You're doing something that's like at a point where the weight loss is actually maybe taking you further from health. Outside of that context, it's highly unlikely that there's a calorie amount that is going to move you towards being less healthy. Like what I'm trying to say is that it's unlikely that you could tell me 70% of America is either overweight or obese. It's very unlikely that the unhealthy thing you're doing is eating too little. It's a little harsh statement. I'll put some context on it, but it's unlikely that you should be worried that eating too little is making you unhealthy. When if it just in the yes, not fat loss isn't going to make everybody healthier. That's not true. Being a normal healthy body weight, we could use whatever terminology we want to kind of decide what that is, but that's generally a good thing for health. If you are overweight or or have obesity, generally speaking, weight loss is most likely going to improve your health in some way. And if you're worried that the calorie number is so low that it is inherently unhealthy, just not true. You're going to find a calorie number is going to be sooner unsustainable than it will be inherently unhealthy. And like, yeah, you even mentioned it. You're like, yeah, it's unlikely your fat's going to get so low for a fat loss phase that it's going to affect your hormones. Those things run on very long time scales. So if your fat is on the lower, we say like 0.3 to 0.4 grams per pound, whatever, at least if it's lower than that for a short period of time, short meaning even like a deficit that short is in air quotes here. It's like even if 12 to 16 weeks, that's not going to have some lifelong drastic effect on your hormones. I just think that you answered it wonderfully with like a lot of health context, but I just feel like most people are going to run into this is unsustainable before this is unhealthy. We could talk about the muscle loss. I might, again, pose two different contexts. If you're somebody who's overweight, chances are you're at very little risk for muscle loss if you're training. Yep. Even if you do lose muscle, if you also lost a significant amount of body fat that did actually have a positive impact on your health, you might trade away some lean body mass in the short term, because hopefully you're doing resistance training, and as you transition to maintenance and eat more, you can build back that lean body mass. And if going slightly lower in calories, I mean, we do see some research on very low calorie dieting, on like a bit more of this intermittent fasting approach as well. The muscle loss is always interesting for me, because if somebody has obesity and you're like, hey, we're going to lose 100 pounds and you're going to lose 15, 20 pounds of lean body mass, you're like, well, I don't want to lose that much lean body mass. It's like, okay, but this is a net improvement in health, and you can build that lean body mass back. And that might actually be an overstatement. You might be able to retain that with an adequate protein intake and the resistance training stimulus. But I just I just think about myself. Like, if I'm thinking about a calorie number, I'm never thinking like this is unhealthy. Like, what's unhealthy? Being extremely lean. So it's not unhealthy for you to eat very little calories, at least in the short to moderate term. Like, and then someone's like, well, what if I do it for the long term? What happens if you do it for the long term? You become extremely lean and you are then unhealthy. It's not necessarily that the lack of food is the unhealthy thing. It's the state of being underweight that is unhealthy. And yeah, potentially loss in lean body mass it's never a good thing, for sure. If you can prevent lean body mass. And I just think like most people are this discussion of like how little is too little, you're going to run into this is unsustainable before this is unhealthy every single time. And like you said, 9 times out of 10, you're going to just end up with like what can I reasonably sustain? And then yes, the leaner you get, I think the risk of muscle loss does go up. And so we have to take that into account. But again, that's usually in the context of like a lean, healthy person looking to get more into that like really lean shredded category, and that slightly different context, slightly different way of looking at it.
Most people who are at a point where they've found that they're worried that their calories are too low, they're already at a point that they cannot sustain, and they're already not sustaining it. It's just they're forgetting that they're not. So they're very commonly, they'll be nailing their diet during the week, but then they'll have slip-ups on the weekend that can add up to like a couple of thousand calories extra over what they should normally be doing, which then wipes away the majority of the calorie deficit that they created during the week, setting them up for these kind of, I wouldn't want to say binge starve cycles, but these splurge undereat cycles. And that's just being conveniently forgotten. Or there will be other snacks or drinks that are not being logged, or they're using a food logger. MyFitnessPal is a very common one, which is great because it's got so many entries, but it's terrible in that a lot of them are user-generated entries, which means that they just might be choosing inaccurate entries, and therefore they're actually eating more than they thought. So, all of these things, they kind of compound.
Yeah, I say that MyFitnessPal is one of the best apps because it has so many entries, and it's also one of the worst apps because it has so many entries, and it can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah. You want to have one that's, when you're looking, just look for one that's got a verified nutrition database. I think MyNet Diary is a free one that does that. And then I know Macro Factor, that's the one that I recommend to people. I think it's something like $10 a month, but I mean, it's great. It's run by some friends, Greg Knuckles. Yep. Over at strongerbyscience.com. Anyway, and there's one other thing I would say here. It is possible for calories to be chronically low where it does affect health. Typically, this is with people who have been accurately counting their calories. They have been dieting typically for a very long time. They're trying to sustain usually unrealistically low levels of body fat. And it affects, it does affect their health. That is probably not going to affect most people here. It's something called relative energy deficiency syndrome. If you would like to read about that, you can go to my website, rippedbody.com, and then metabolic-damage. Now, I've titled it that because that's what people are looking for in Google. It's not actually metabolic damage. I just wanted to like take those hits away and bring them into a more sensible discussion of that. And my co-author on the Muscular Strength Pyramid books, Eric Helms, he's the one with a PhD. I classify him as the smart one. He's the one that has written that article, so you'll get a breakdown of that.
Let's stay with that for a second. How do we parse out well, we would say, okay, well, I'll throw it to you without my hypothesis. How do we parse out where the health negative implications are coming from? The attempt to maintain an unhealthy level of body fat, like unhealthily low level of body fat, versus and we can talk about, you can speak to Red S as much as, we can talk about it, but how do we decide that this is just a person who's maintaining a level of body fat that is inherently unhealthy versus this is a person who's just not getting enough nutrients to support their activity and is thus in a physiological state of unhealth? I mean, where do we, or are they just so intertwined? It's a chicken or the egg scenario.
Yeah, this is not my area of expertise because it is not something that I run into because I work with men. But yeah, I do believe that the two are very much intertwined. And then you can kind of assess it. It results in, like, say, the loss of menses or your irregular menstrual cycle. I'm reading from the article here. Persistent focus on food, more frequent illness, a poorer mood state, the inability to increase your performance, a loss of libido, particularly for men, that will be, or metabolic or reproductive hormone panels outside of the reference ranges. If those things, if multiple of those things are true for you, then it may be a case that you are in a state of relative energy deficiency syndrome. Now, any individual one of these things can happen when you are dieting. But if it's chronic, then it may be a good idea to eat more, come to maintenance, perhaps allow yourself to gain a little weight, start feeling normal again before you then start dieting again.
Let's talk about that scenario. There are a couple that I'd like to go back to, but let's take this idea of diet breaks and maintenance phases. And you can reference, how you utilize or don't utilize them in your own coaching. But this idea of taking a diet break to boost metabolism, or taking a maintenance phase between diet periods to boost or rebuild the metabolism. Is there some truth to this? Total nonsense? Something in between?
Well, when we diet, the metabolism gradually adapts. You see, you asked me for like short, rapid fire questions.
Well, we've done metabolic adaptation here and on the podcast a million times. Everyone listening to the podcast is aware our metabolism goes down, through a reduction mostly.
Okay, great.
And how large of a person you are, you shrinking, your body requires less calories, NEAT goes down. And there's this idea of, well, if those adaptations are happening, and that's, some of those reductions are not just because I'm smaller. These are actually the metabolic adaptations that we're talking about that are more than what you'd expect by just having lost the weight. This idea that a short period of eating more might reverse those, and I could go back into a deficit with these, with a boost to my metabolism, and I could go back to losing weight, let's say more quickly or at a continued rate, let's say.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. No. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that having a diet break or coming to maintenance is not a good idea, but that's more for the psychological reasons rather than the physiological benefits. And really, it just comes down to these metabolic adaptations as they go down, as your metabolism ramps down. That doesn't happen suddenly, and we can't reverse them suddenly either. So it tends to be not just the time period, but the magnitude of the calorie deficit. And again, it's a function of the time period and the magnitude of the calorie surplus from where you are, or the length of time that you're at, say, maximum maintenance. That's what affects it. So having a 2-week break at maintenance calories isn't going to do much for isn't going to fire up your metabolism and suddenly allow you to, let's say your weight loss has stalled almost completely. It's not going to suddenly then allow you to eat the same, but then carry on losing weight at your desired rate. Now, that is something that I thought was the case years and years ago, but I learned as a coach, and unfortunately, it's not how it works.
Yep. And we've talked about the Matador study on the podcast before, and the refeed research, and the misconception is that if you were to take somebody in the midst of that diet break and look under the hood, you'd see a lot of those metabolic adaptations. You'd see them reversed. You'd see an improvement in leptin, which is like the big one that we're looking at, I guess, in this context, like representative of metabolic adaptation to some degree. And you'd see it would look good, but it just so happens the minute you go back to losing fat, there's no lasting benefit. So it actually does reflect exactly what you'd feel, which is you'd feel better during those weeks when you eat more, and you'd go right back to the normal state of your deficit thereafter. And, there's, like you said, some slightly less tangible psychological fatigue that's maybe attenuated, that maybe on the back end of this break does allow you to go back to your deficit and adhere better and, get a bit of, and it sounds like, like whimsical, like feeling of like, well, you just feel better and you can go back to it. But that's a real thing. There's a psychological fatigue of dieting. It's hard to parse that out of the physiological, what's happening. They're very intertwined as well. But sometimes just taking a step back, going to maintenance for 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, 3 days, 1 day, and the funny part is there used to be like we used to attach like refeed 3 days, high carbs. And then it was like diet break, 7 days, maintenance phase, this many, and it's just made up. We just made up those parameters. It's like sometimes I'll have a client just take a maintenance day, right? And it's the same exact concept of just taking a break from this deficit. Psychologically, physiologically, you feel good for the day too. We're not hoping for a big lasting benefit thereafter, but it just, once you realize that we made up all these time scales, there's no time scale outside of a very long time, right? Like you had said, the metabolic adaptations downward happen slowly. They reverse slowly. And so outside of a long period of time, which I guess we could talk about, it's like, where is this amount of time? I mean, again, we are just operating with heuristics, like ways of thinking about this. I've given general recommendations to clients, but again, there's no exact playbook on this. So do you have a general recommendation of like, hey, you might want to spend this long of a period of time before trying to cut again?
Yeah, sure. So with clients, I typically recommend a 1 to 2 week diet break every it ends up being like every 8 to 16 weeks usually. And I base that on how they're feeling, and then also practically on where their vacations line up. And a diet break is not a free-for-all. You can have structure where let's say you're not going away on holiday, you still will be having access to, your supermarket cooking regular foods. Then you may wish to bump up your calorie intake by, say, 500 to 700 calories. So I call that a controlled diet break. I'd say you're going on holiday, you might consider that an ad lib diet break, where you're trying to practice using your hunger and fullness cues and eyeballing portion sizes and just kind of sensible rules where you don't have a dessert with every meal. Excuse me, where you don't have a dessert with every meal, and you don't, you limit yourself to, say, a glass of wine instead of like a bottle of wine for every dinner while you're away. It's not supposed to be a free-for-all. So that's one area, that's diet breaks. Now, if we back up a bit, like the goal is to, if we're in a fat loss phase, which the context of what we're talking about here, that can often be a very long time, many, many months, in order to get to where you need. And faced with that, it's very difficult to continue psychologically. So you're inserting these points where you're having like these mental breaks from it. And it doesn't just have to be these structured diet breaks. You can also have, say, free meals. Notice the wording there, not cheat meals. Or you could have free days. And again, the wording there, not cheat days. Now, everyone likes to follow Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and he's famous for his Saturday cheat days, where he looks like he pounds down like 7,000 calories. Now, the most important thing here is you're not Dwayne Rock Johnson with his energy demands. He's also not dieting, and you're also not 280 pounds, right, of pure muscle. Okay, you can absolutely undo all of your efforts from the week on a single day, or a very, very, very large meal. So I would not recommend that. But allowing yourself a break from the restriction of counting your protein, carbs, and fats every so often can be helpful. Maybe you just give yourself a 1,000-calorie budget for that meal instead of like looking after the protein, carbs, and fats, just letting it where it lie, and you do that once or twice a week. Yeah. It's all about giving yourself that mental break so that you can sustain things. That's why we have weekends from work, right?
Agreed. I think once you recognize as a coach that it's just a psychological break, you can kind of do what feels right for the client. You can give them some options, and you can judge, like you said, based on how they're feeling and what would be the best tool for how they're feeling at that time. It's just like there's no longer a playbook of, well, you've been dieting this long, your metabolism's this damaged, and to repair it, we need this much time at this. That's not the playbook. The playbook is, I have a person in front of me who's, maybe I normally give, like you said, maybe I normally give my client a diet break at the 12-week mark, but on the 12th week mark, they just got things going. Maybe they're only 6 weeks into the deficit. Maybe the first 6 weeks they were figuring it out. And it's like, am I going to then stop this client in a good spot of momentum where biofeedback's good and things are moving? It's of course not. And so, like you said, maybe there's somebody who does really well with an untracked day, right? A free day. Somebody does well when they go on vacation, using that as an opportunity to practice non-tracking habits. And so I don't think that what we do is like overly, I was going to say the art of coaching, but that puts like what we do like up on some crazy pedestal. But there is an art of assessing the individual and being able to have that conversation back and forth. And I just like, there's a lot of things that we're finding out in fitness right now. I'm not saying I'm on team it doesn't matter. Like there are things that matter, absolutely. But it is cool when you have a lot of like meal frequency. It's not that it doesn't matter, but there's a ton of room for personal preference. Macro distribution of carb to fat ratio. It doesn't not matter at all, but there's a lot of room for personal preference. And that's like a nice thing where we have a lot of these things that do come down to personal preference that you can help your client with. It's the likelihood that they can sustain it's going to be better if they're making some of these decisions for themselves. Let's, exactly. I want to pick your brain. We got 10 minutes here. I want to pick your brain on, I saw a post that you had said that you wrote about. I've made many posts on calorie cycling and this discussion of, that it is mathematically, it makes sense. You could eat 3,000 and 1,000 and 3,000 and 1,000, and it would be the same outcome, fat loss, body comp wise, likely over the long term, be the same as 2,000 a day. What's your take with how you approach this with clients? They've probably heard about it at some point. They're like, maybe I could do higher and lower days. Should I eat more on training days? Is there a protocol you go through with them?
Yeah, so just to address the specific example that wasn't necessarily a real one that you said there, of 3,000 and then 1,000. If you are going, if you do have an extreme where the 1 day is 3x the other day, and you're cycling like that, there probably are going to be recovery implications to that. And because there will be recovery implications and muscle growth implications, then your physique will differ over time, but your weight won't, because it is calories in, calories out that controls weight. So it kind of comes down to whether you fluctuate your calorie intake or not. Kind of comes down to this point that we were making about sustainability. So some people, they have massive issues with consistency. They are in this they're struggling to get consistent with their food intake. They have days where they're just way off. They're typically, that will be the weekends. Perhaps it'll be one specific weeknight. For them, there can be an argument to be made that they should just try to keep their calories the same every day for a few weeks, build some meal plans for themselves based on the foods that they enjoy, that and these meals that they can rotate through without having to think about it, so that they can then build consistency and perhaps start there. Now, with the person that say that they're okay with their consistency, but they want to allow themselves a bit more flexibility, perhaps specifically on the weekends, then they might say have, I don't know, 200 calories less on their weekdays so that they can have an extra 1,000 calories to quote unquote spend on the weekend. And that's fine as well. That's a totally legit strategy. And because, you might be eating, say, 10,000 calories or 14,000 calories or more over, depending on body size, activity levels, etc., over the course of a week, this is, a small percentage difference that we're talking about here. We're not going to have big implications for recovery there. So that is totally fine. But if doing that feeds into the already currently existing problem of starve yourself in the week, binge on the weekends, then it's not a good thing. It's not doing you any favors. It's like once you are away from that cycle, then allowing yourself more flexibility on the weekends, I think, is the approach to go with. You kind of have to earn it and prove to yourself that you can cope with that, I think, because otherwise, for all too quickly, that can become a free for all. Now, something that I do with clients very often is I'll get them to have higher carb training days and therefore higher calorie training days than their rest days. I used to think this is something that Martin Birkin of leangains.com used to talk about and do with his clients. This is something that I did for a long time. I still offer that as something that clients can consider. Does that hold any advantages in outcome, assuming perfect adherence? Probably not. Though perfect adherence is that big caveat there, and the mental break of not having the same food every single day is big, and that can help with adherence, and it comes down to adherence after all. So there is flexibility there, but with great power comes great responsibility. Don't abuse it.
Yeah, I think we're in total agreement there. I think most people, I don't want to go overly generalizing here. In many cases, a non-linear surplus is how most people have become overweight, who have gained weight over many years, non-linearly. Most people are not in a 300 calorie surplus every day, to a T, and gaining at a nice steady rate, maybe gaining a steady rate week to week, month to month, year to year, but most people are in a non-linear surplus. Most people are eating asymmetric calories. They're calorie cycling anyway. They're having low days, really high days, then low days, whether they're doing it consciously or, like you said, it's there's some psychological pseudo binge restrict, not necessarily that, exact terminology, but like you said, a famine feast cycle here. That's how most people have gotten to where they probably are hiring you. And that's not to say that this is the same, because we'd be doing it mathematically in a way that would still adhere to the goals. But that pattern of living is kind of what got you here in the first place. And almost facing the fear of consistency and continuity, maybe a lot, like you said, eating the same thing every day can be a little bit daunting. And sometimes having a high carb, low carb approach can be nice, because on the higher carb day, maybe you have more rice and more bread and more fruit. Other day, more avocado, whatever, and more nuts, more oils, whatever. But I think we both agree, like, that the person who's coming to you, who's like been eating a bit more chaotic, making it up as they go, not really having a plan, not really having structure. The first thing we're trying to do is establish some structure, and getting clients to eat in a more of a similar style each day and get rid of some of these big fluctuations, super high day, super low day, super high day, super low day, is just really, and like you said, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll bring that client to that spot, build some consistency, and then they've earned the right to open up and be like, okay, well, I can do this. And now I could maybe also do some small fluctuations up and down to match my lifestyle a bit better. I really love that answer. I think that's exactly how I would take it as well. Yeah.
And then one thing I'd add here, like, just because you are having the same calories each day, it doesn't necessarily mean the same food each day. Although I understand the want to keep things simple. And here's where you need to find a balance for yourself. One thing that I tend to do, I have the same breakfast. Sometimes I eat breakfast, sometimes not. But I would recommend that you choose one or the other, because I'm not currently in a cutting phase or gaining phase here. So, yeah, and I've got a lot more experience of this. But if you are going to have breakfast, perhaps have the same breakfast each day. If you're going to have a lunch, perhaps have the same lunch each day. But rotate through your dinners and think of meals that fit your calorie budget and your macro targets, and then you can rotate through them, and you might end up, say, with 7 different dinners that you could have, which tends to be the more sociable time, tends to be the more sociable meal. And then what could your breakfasts and your lunches be? Well, if I give my very personal example here, breakfast, a Greek yogurt, which is almost no carb, very low fat, Greek yogurt with a scoop of chocolate protein mixed up in a bowl. Absolutely delicious, keeps me full. Lunch, big chicken salad, and I mean lots of vegetables in there, and not too oily dressing, or not too much of that oily dressing in there. Great filling lunch, high protein lunch, and that gives me a calorie buffer, and then I only need to worry about 1 meal a day. And I just build 4, 5, 6, 7 different dinners that fit my food preferences, and I rotate through them. But that is infinitely better than being on a food hunt each day, grabbing random items from the cupboard, then logging that. Oh my goodness, now I need to eat another 110 grams of protein and 37 grams of fats and 133 grams of carbs. Where am I going to get this? And, don't be the food hunt person.
Just, yeah. The analogy that makes a lot of sense to me is, imagine you had to, every time that you eat, you also had to change your outfit head to toe. If you had to get new socks and shirt and shorts and hat, gloves, if you had to do that, chances are you'd probably buy a bunch of similar shirts and similar shorts and similar socks. Maybe not exactly the same. But, when you're going out to dinner, maybe you have a new outfit that you go to the closet and you make it from scratch. And you have some staples. But if you had to make a new outfit every time you ate, you probably would lean on some staples, and you'd have a lot of similar shirts, and maybe it wouldn't be exactly the same, but it would be exhausting to come up with a new outfit 3 to 5 times a day. Just like it's exhausting, like you said, open up the fridge and try and mentally make something from scratch. And, you and I have both been doing this for a long time. So what you just said makes a ton of sense to me. I eat the same breakfast every day, the same lunch every day, but then dinner, and potentially if I have a snack after dinner, that stuff rotates. And that's where I can get a little bit of novelty, of new stuff, where I can enjoy, what am I in the mood for? And if you do what am I in the mood for 3 to 5 times a day, it's exhausting. I agree.
Yeah, totally exhausting. Yeah, it's not the way to go.
All right, my man. It's I'm just, looks like I'm telling ghost stories here. It's 8 p.m. for me. It's 10 a.m. for you, right?
Yeah.
You got to get started with your day. I'll let you go. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, and I'll link to all your Instagram, your resources, the book, all of that stuff in the podcast show notes.
Sure. If you want a little bit of entertainment, Instagram.com. Well, sorry, on Instagram, it's Andy_ripped body. But these are short videos, and because they're short videos, you are getting snippets without getting the big picture. So I would encourage you, if you're serious at learning, wanting to understand the bigger picture puzzle pieces, go to rippedbody.com and you'll read my far more in-depth articles there. That's what I'm known for. It's not the Instagram stuff. That's something that I've started doing the last few years. The reason that I'm in business, and business is good enough to keep me in fresh undies, is because people really like the articles on the site. So that's what I'd say. Go to rippedbody.com, and if you want to see my thoughts on nutrition setup specifically, you'll see right on the site there a box. Enter your email address in there and it'll spit it out. Yes, you'll see a big chat dude, Chris Lovato, next to that box. It doesn't mean that it's only for men. It's just because, in this business, if you try to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. So I started working with men, and then because I started working with men, I ended up only working with men, because these are the only people who I know who to train. because I don't have any experience of women now, right? So that's kind of it. So just don't let the image and that it seems to be geared toward men put you off, is what I'd say if you are a woman.
Excellent. Awesome. I'm going to link everything in the show notes. I appreciate your time. And hopefully, I don't know if you stayed up for you definitely didn't, the Man United game that was on at like 3 a.m. for you. But they had an amazing game and it was frustrating to watch, frankly, to be honest. But yeah.
Happy to hear. What were you against Arsenal?
No, against Liverpool, 2-1. Craziness.
Oh, good.
Nuts.
Good.
You were dead asleep.
Right.
Middle of the night for you guys.
Absolutely. I had to be fresh for this.
Yep.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.